The Social Security of Barbadians has been nestled in the arms of the National Insurance Scheme since 1967, and over the last 55 years, the benefits have evolved to meet society's needs, from sickness to maternity to disability and of course pension, both contributory and non-contributory. These are but a few of the benefits currently offered by the NIS. It's pitched as a lifeline in vulnerable moments, and that was perhaps best demonstrated over the last 2 years, as Barbados, like the rest of the world, felt the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting in many workers needing to rely heavily on their unemployment and other NIS benefits. Now we're hearing that the fund could be in jeopardy in the next 12 to 15 years if adjustments are not made now. That's part of the conclusion of a recent actuarial report that has prompted government to embark on broad-based stakeholder consultations as part of its search for a solution. So in this episode of In the Know, I sit down with Actuary Derek Osborne to talk about the current state of the NIS and what's required to safeguard this critical aspect of Barbados' social safety net. I'm Krystal Hoyte, and this is In the Know. Mr. Osborne, let's start with the current state of the NIS. Is the NIS currently in crisis?
Thank you for having me, Krystal, first of all. And no, the NIS is not in crisis today. What we're doing is trying to prevent a crisis. Every 3 years, the NIS Act requires that an actuary is engaged, and the actuary makes long-term projections, and the most recent projections suggest that if nothing is done, and that's key, if nothing is done, the NIS is not sustainable for the long term. And so there's no fear about NIS being unable to pay benefits next week or next year or 5 years from now. But the challenge is, if nothing is done, then crisis may hit in about 12 to 15 years' time.
So not yet, but it could possibly be.
It could be if the can is kicked down the road and nothing is done.
What were some of the contributing factors that ultimately led us to this situation?
So the scheme in the beginning was designed on a partially funded basis. And the expectation was that the population would grow and that contributions, while we knew would eventually be less than benefits, the last 15 to 20 years of economic growth in Barbados have been low. There have been more negative years of growth than positive years of growth. And that's before COVID. And so what we have is already births are less than deaths. And with migration, the population is decreasing. The employment levels are decreasing. NIS contributors is decreasing. And so what we have is a situation where the number of pensioners is increasing, while NIS contributions are decreasing. Contributors are decreasing. And so the pressure on the fund is leading to a widening gap between income and expenditure. And reserves are already being used to help pay benefits. So the reserves are built up over 50 years of contributions, being more than benefits. And now we're drawing down. If you keep drawing down on those reserves and those savings, then eventually there'll be no more savings, and then all benefits have to be met from current contributions. And that's when crisis is going to really hit.
The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the need for NIS, even for those in that self-employed category. So I guess the question is, how can the NIS incentivize self-employed persons, both registered and those from that informal sector, mechanics, hairdressers, even the coconut vendor, to contribute?
So number one is education, right? I think that, everybody in Barbados who works, whether they be formally employed or self-employed in formal sector, should pay NIS contributions. The history is that only 1 in 8 persons who are self-employed pays NIS. That's low. What we need to do is educate them as to why NIS is a good thing to pay into. And as you mentioned, the example during COVID, the government had to give support to many of these persons who, depending on what the industry they were in, weren't able to have any income. And so it's education first. But more importantly, I think it's ensuring that we find a way to meet them where they are. When NIS was created 55 years ago, it was mainly for formal sector employees, whereas the employer completed the form, submitted the contribution to NIS. Self-employed people don't work like those in the formal sector. And so systems need to be put in place where there are no monthly forms, no requirement to pay monthly, and they can pay as much as they want. Because if you're a ZR driver or a taxi driver, certain times of year are better than others. So if we can find a way to have them pay all of their money in the tourist season, for example, and don't worry about it for the rest of the year, let's do that. If we can find a way to have them pay online at midnight when they go home from a hard day's work, we can do that. If they have a good fishing day or a good vending day, they can put $100 on their account whenever they wish. We need to find a way to allow them to pay wherever they are, whenever they want.
It sounds like you're suggesting that the NIS adapts, particularly at a time when we're seeing that trend of both private and public sector moving towards contract work.
Right. So if you think about NIS 55 years ago, we really haven't changed much in terms of structure and defining what an employee is, what a person who's self-employed is. And as we know, there's a gig economy. There are many people working from their laptop in their room in Barbados for somebody in the US or in England. There are people who in England working for Barbados companies. And so we really have to find a way to make sure that we are able to identify what truly is an employee in today's setting, where the line gets blurred to become a self-employed person or contract worker. We have heard stories that many employers are now deeming their employees to be on contract, even though the employer controls the hours of employment, what you do and how you do it. So I think the Ministry of Labor first, and the NIS in tune with the Ministry of Labor needs to be clear and educate employers and individuals as to what makes somebody an employee as opposed to a self-employed person. And NIS in turn then should expect contributions from them depending on what category they fall in. Self-employed people, they control their own destiny. So many of them think they're not going to get old. Right? A man may not want to qualify to pay contributions at full because he won't qualify for maternity benefits. Right? He probably never gets sick in his mind. Right? But you never know. We saw with COVID, life happens, and there was unforeseen circumstance. None of us expected that. But it's good when you have everybody in society participating for the benefit of all. And so the more contributions we have, as the lower the cost will be for everybody.
Now, Mr. Osborne, you mentioned more contributions, but some Barbadians are suggesting that they should be allowed to opt out of contributing to the NIS and perhaps invest in private retirement plans, endowment plans, etc. What are your thoughts on this?
Right. The short answer is no. Right? For a system like the NIS, which is a national social security system, not only pensions, we pay sickness benefit, maternity, employment injury, and disability, and so on, survivors, and of course age pension. Opting out by a few makes it cost more for those who participate. And also, every benefit NIS has meets a certain purpose. And except for maternity, where men will never qualify, you never know when it's your turn to become sick, to become hurt while working, and we're all going to get old if we live long enough. And so opting out should not be offered. What can be offered for self-employed people is a different basket of benefits, where if we realize that they're self-employed, essentially, even if you're sick, you still have to go to work because your income depends on your work. Maybe we don't offer them sickness benefit, or we don't offer them employment injury benefit, and therefore we reduce the contribution rate so it's more affordable to them. They value what's been offered more, and therefore they'll be inclined to more readily pay. NIS offers many benefits, and the good thing about NIS is that the rules can be changed along the way, unlike an insurance contract. And so sustainability for the NIS is probably more guaranteed than a private sector firm, especially given the issues we've heard in the past with some companies failing. What we're doing at NIS now is having the ability to amend the rules, make sure that the promise of the benefit is affordable to the contributor. And so for younger people like yourself, the expectation is that as the country and the economy evolve, NIS will be adjusted and be dynamic to ensure that not only the benefits are relevant at every point in time, but also sustainable for the children to come. And so the advantage of the NIS is that we can, every few years, look to make changes to keep that balance between benefit adequacy, contribution affordability, and long-term sustainability.
I want to take a look at other jurisdictions where we're seeing tax clearance certificates being made mandatory for receiving official documents or even securing loans. What do you think about that approach?
Certainly, all arms of government should speak to one another. And if you're obligated to pay taxes to the state or to NIS, then any license should only be issued once you're compliant. Now, there's some practical challenges with that. And once we make NIS easier for people to contribute, more flexible, without forms, then there certainly should be relationships with other government departments to ensure that compliance at NIS is improved. Now, not everybody needs to travel. Not everybody needs that certificate, right? So we still need to find other ways that are going to ensure that everybody, the coconut vendor, the lawyer, taxi driver, the doctor, that everybody pays their contributions, and there's no discrimination against those who want to travel versus those who are still at home.
Understood. Now, I know that you're in the early stages of consultations, but what has been the feedback from stakeholders thus far?
So actually very positive. I think people in general have been nationalistic first and selfish second. And so we've heard many ideas. Of course, no one wants to pay more contributions or get lower benefits. But I think the level of understanding is there. Pension reform has happened before. The dialogue has been extensive. And so the ideas are coming from young, especially from the young. For the younger people like yourself, you probably are more concerned than somebody who's 55 years old, right? Is it worth my paying NIS, for the next 30 years? And so the solution has to be a Barbados solution. Other countries have faced similar challenges, and they've reformed their pension systems the way they think best. We have to find a solution that's going to work for Barbados. And, we come back every 3 or 4 years and we look and see how we're performing. We set targets, we set benchmarks, and then we assess where we are. And if we need to tweak, if the economy performs better than expected, then we are fine. If it's worse than expected, then we may have to tweak again in the future. But certainly, the NIS is too important to let a crisis approach.
And to avoid that crisis, the ultimate solution may involve a number of adjustments. What are some of the possible combinations on the table that can be used to secure the fund's future?
So essentially, everything is on the table right now. The consultations hopefully will bring out ideas. We've heard many, some that we've heard before, some that we have not heard before. But typically, if you want to make a pension system less expensive or sustainable, there really is either you increase your income, which is from contributions, or you decrease your benefits. In this case, over 70% of expenditure is the old age pension. And so that's where we have to look more closely at what changes can be made there to reduce old age pension costs. The retirement age, or the pensionable age, is now 67. That could be increased. So essentially, we make people delay their pension start date, maybe a year or two. Of course, over a period of time, it wouldn't happen overnight. Age 60 is currently the first age at which a reduced pension is available. That could be increased to 63, 64, 65. The pension formula, which right now produces up to 60% replacement after 36 years of contributions, could be extended to make it 40 years of contributions, 45 years of contributions. So essentially slightly more for people who aren't yet at the maximum. Or we could even reduce the maximum 60% to 55% or 50%, right? So there are options, right? And of course, if we reduce NIS, then people take personal responsibility, while they're working and earning and hopefully saving, to increase that replacement rate by doing their own investing and saving, whether it be insurance products, whether it be buying some property, whether it be putting the money in the mattress, if that's what you do best. But we have to find ways for people to take their own responsibility for thinking ahead. A lot of us, we have children, and we plan for their education in 18 years' time, right? We need to think about our own selves and plan for our retirement at 67, and maybe get advice if necessary on how much we really need. But typically, we think that between 2/3 or 75% of your previous salary when you were working should get you through quite well in old age.
And speaking of solutions, is one of the suggestions on the table increasing the pensionable age from 67 to perhaps 70 or 72?
So that's on the table. That's on the table, you know. So even though we have unemployment in Barbados still, there are many people at 67 who still want to work and who still work, right? And so we need to find a way to have employers and workers come together, and we either have some standard retirement ages that are going to be consistent with the NIS, and so 68. But if we do increase the age, it won't happen, like I think in 2004 reforms, it was done a half year every 3 years. So I'll give you an example. If we do increase the age to 69, say, it might be a half a year, 67.5 at the first increase. And then for 3 years, it remains constant. So people who were 64 when the change was first made will only be 6 months difference for the person who was 3 years earlier. And then every 3 years, you go up by half a year until you reach 69, okay? You know, we have some Nordic countries have retirement age of 70. You know, some are flexible ages. And the longer you stay in the workforce, you know, you get adjustment and the pensions could be actually increased because you stay longer. So we need to find a Barbados solution. You know, one that works for what Barbadians want in terms of that retirement age, that first age where you think, you know, I've worked long enough, I want to go now. And ultimately, how long they want to stay in the workforce until age 70, 72. But we're living longer. We are healthier than we were 55 years ago when NIS first started. And so it's consistent to increase the retirement age to a higher age.
But these are just options on the table. We've started this national discussion, but we're working against a timeline here of 13, 14, 15 years before the fund is in crisis. Has a date been set to implement some of these reforms?
Right. So working backwards, there is no specific time other than when the fund has no more assets to say you have to make a change, right? But the earlier, the better. We never want to get to a point where the reforms needed are going to be so painful that people will resist them. So the earlier, the better would be the short answer. The Prime Minister has indicated that consultations will be held in the month of August. Shortly after, you know, a team will get together and start working on ideas and provisions. And so it's left to the government, to the board and the government to decide exactly when consultations and a decision will be made. But, you know, from an advisory perspective, the sooner, the better. And those discussions hopefully are going to be all-encompassing, talking to the young, talking to, you know, employers, workers, politicians of both sides, right? Just to make sure we have good buy-in. And so whenever a decision is made on the final set of reforms, you know, it is easy for people to accept because of the consultation that took place before.
So we're working towards a Barbados solution.
Correct.
That's the perfect place to end, Mr. Osborne. Thank you for joining us.
Krystal, it's great to be with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Following my interview with Mr. Osborne, town hall meetings got underway, and Barbadians from all walks of life showed up to voice their concerns.
Maternity leave. Now, obviously, being a mother of 4, I can tell you, it is not attractive for a lot of Bajan women to get children in this economy. It's getting harder and harder. And then you got to deal with some employers that ain't want to pay, want to find that as a reason to cut you off from paying, to come back to work, and then you're going through the NIS, probably only to get 12 weeks for a maternity leave. You got to make it more attractive. It's just like in any business. If you give some, you get back some. So if you extend maternity leave in like a way of like 4 to 6 months or something to give the parents more time, you might get encouraged to people to bring more children because you just got to give to get. That's my voice.
I heard the Auditor General say that national insurance is paying dead people. That I have a problem with. I believe that if there is an audit and things are put in perspective, we will be able to move forward from a better position.
Dead people, I know that is a big issue. At present, we pay each month 48,000 pensioners. So this is pensioners only. This is not disability or anything. 48,000 pensioners. Years ago, the life certificate was discontinued. So therefore, we wait for the monthly update from the registry. So right now, we are processing payments for the end of August into September. So we are always ahead. So we are always going to be mailing out pensions ahead. So we depend on two systems. One, updating our records based on the registry and the goodwill of families to notify us that the person have died. So, so I would say that 5 out of 48,000, and the system was able to still identify the 5 out of 48,000, does show that we do have a system in place. And when I mail out at the end of August checks, somebody's going to have a check that takes them to the end of September, but may, God forbid, die in that period. That is what we are looking at, okay? So we have looked at how often we should get the updates from the registry, how often we should update our system, and we are certainly addressing it. When we did some investigations, these things happened in 2020, and when we went to the home of a deceased person, they had the check stacked there. So they just figured that after a while we would stop sending them, but they didn't think to return them or to notify us that had happened. So, but rest assured that that is something that we are working on.
Increasing the age is a no-no. You need to bring in younger people into the system who can work longer. When I hit sick, I would like to retire all right now. And that truth.
The first, when we talk about increasing the pension age, we also got to look at unemployment. I saw from the figures that was 30,000 people less working than before. So if you increase the pension age, you also stop the younger people who want to work and who can contribute for much longer to actually work and contribute to the fund. We also, this is in itself a multifaceted problem that NIS is facing. I don't think NIS alone should be in this. Not only just cabinet, there should be someone from the health sector here. Because if you're allowing me to work to 72, how effective will it be at 72? How effective will you be at 72, Mr. Actuary? How effective will you be at 72, ma'am? Some persons might get dementia, you might not be able to hear well, all of a sudden you're going to hear in it. Being efficient also has to do something to do with it. So we need to, should never be an option in the first place.
I've listened, and I'm speaking for myself now, rather than the board of the NIS or anything, because we have not yet discussed it. But presently, I think I've listened to Derek, and Derek said it earlier. There is, and a lot of people coming up here said it earlier, those solutions of raising contributions and raising age, we have heard from you all tonight that those solutions will not work. Right, so take those solutions aside. There is and I've heard that there is the other solution, and perhaps it has not been expressed as forcefully as it could be. And one of those solutions really is changing the structure of the benefits and the payments.
The national discussion on revitalizing the NIS continues across the island, with town hall meetings scheduled throughout the month. Thank you for joining us.